and a happy midweek to the people of Christ the King. This is PB coming to you with the weekly spiritual vitamin. As you know, we've been going over the marks of discipleship, and the first week we talked about praying. The second week we talked about the importance of reading the Bible daily, and this week we're going to focus on worshiping weekly. Worship weekly. I'm talking about the value of worship, and even though we haven't been able to be together, the value of being able to connect online, whether it's through the weekly worship expression that's put out, or through the Zoom calls, or things of that nature. But it's how to be a community of faith and how to be reminded that worshiping weekly is something that is good for our faith, it's good for our minds, our bodies, and our souls. But first, some scripture that talks about the importance of worshiping together. The first one comes from Hebrews. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." And from Acts, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any who had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received food with glad and generous hearts." When you think about worshiping and worshiping weekly, you think, well, why worship? What's the value in worshiping? And the obvious one is the value of worshiping is that you get to come and worship the God that loved us so much that he sent Jesus into the world to model for us a way of living and to give us a, a template of how to interact with one another, how to be with one another, how to love and forgive one another. And when we gather in worship, this is an opportunity for us to give thanks to God for those opportunities that he gives us each week to be the people that God calls us to be in the world. So one of the reasons that we gather together for worship weekly is so that we can worship and give thanks to God. The second reason is for community. Community is a very strong piece in many people's lives, and community brings us strength. It's something to lean on when times are hard, and it's something to share with when you have happy occasions, things you want to share. But mostly it's a great place for love and support. And the beauty of worshiping together with God is that not every week that we would gather together with worship, or we would watch it on our computers or on our tablets or on our televisions. Not every week is a home run week for us. Some weeks we feel like we learned more, or we got more out of a service than other weeks. And but guess what? Those weeks when you're really getting a lot out of it, and when you're really enjoying it, there's somebody who's maybe frustrated by it. And the beauty of a community of faith is that, some weeks are your weeks where you're just excited, and worship is speaking to you, and worship is helping to compel you to be a better person in the world. And some weeks is just not your week. But guess what? It's somebody else's week. So the beauty of worship when we gather together as people of faith, or when we experience worship through an online platform, the beauty of it is that when you're part of a community of faith, some weeks are your weeks and some weeks are someone else's weeks. So some weeks are the weeks that you get supported, and some weeks you support someone else. The third reason is the feeding, is the gathering around God's table, where we all come together as one community, and share in the Lord's meal. We do it together, and we do it each of us getting the same as the other. So we gather together and around that meal, and we're reminded of God's sacrifice for us, but also of the promise that God gave us to always be with us, and the reminder to sit around to gather around the table and give thanks for Jesus Christ. The next one is correction. I don't know about you, but each and every week there are moments that I wish I had back, or there are things that I did or said or ways that I acted that I wish I hadn't. And Sunday or worship time is a great time for correction, to analyze those things and to remember them, and to think about ways through which you could, if presented with a similar situation, could act differently. So that's another great reason to participate in worship on a weekly basis. And the final one is instruction. Sometimes when we come to worship and we hear the scripture, or we might hear a message that may speak to us, or music that may speak to us, it can help to compel us to teach us more about God and his journey through Jesus, and how God interacts in the world, and most importantly, how God's calling us to act in the world. When we hear the stories, and when we hear the legacy of the past, we hear how things transpired, and what happened, and how things could be improved, then we too can improve our own legacy. We're getting ready to go through a series now about legacy, and it's you you leave what you live. What you leave behind are the things that you, or the ways that you live your life. So, by being instructed, by hearing these stories of faith, by hearing these stories of overcoming obstacles, by hearing these stories of hope and love and grace and forgiveness, hearing those stories can help to compel us and to jump into the week and to be the people that God calls us to be. So this week, the spiritual vitamin is to worship weekly, and I hope that you're able to do that during this time. I wish we could be worshiping together, hopefully soon, but now we have the online platforms through which you can experience worship, and hopefully these spiritual vitamins are helping out in the middle of the week, and I look forward to seeing each of you in person very soon, so that we can ask ourselves, what is God calling us to do here on the pier? And what can we do now better together? May God bless you not only this day and this week, but always. Thanks be to God.